And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. My honor today to have on Ambassador Sam Brownback. Ambassador Brownback, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Well, I had a pleasure of meeting Ambassador Brownback back in the fall. We had a great conversation. He spoke at the dinner for Indiana Family Institute, but then had a great conversation afterward. And just really looking forward to diving into the topic of religious freedom with him, not just here in the United States, but really around the world, why it's so important, what's the status of it right now. So if you're unfamiliar with Ambassador Brownback, he served as the ambassador at large for international religious freedom from 2018 to 21. He served as the 46th governor of Kansas from 2011 to 2018, and prior to that, served in the United States Senate and the House of Representatives. He currently serves as co-chair of the International Religious Freedom Summit and is a senior fellow at Global Christian Relief, and he's also chairman of the National Committee for Religious Freedom. So, what a remarkable career and ministry in the public square. Ambassador Brownback, if maybe you could jump in and just share a little bit about your current position or perhaps anything that I might have missed in your bio.
Oh, you've covered more of it. Although one of the big things for me is I've got 10 and a half grandchildren.
Oh, okay.
That's the one, you're kind of going, okay, now this is the real, cherry on top of life as grandkids. And it is just
Mhm.
such a great joy. But those other things have been a wonderful delight. And I'm just honored that the Lord would use me in these ways and continue to do so.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that. And I was really blessed in our conversation just about all the things that you've done and traveled internationally, served in such important roles, and yet you truly value your family. And enjoyed really talking about how you're able to balance some of that out. We'll see if we can get to it at this discussion. So, Ambassador Brownback, do you have just a kind of a recent story of how God has been using you in your ministry?
You know, I think really this International Religious Freedom Summit that we just had, this is a calling I felt to co-chair that. I helped get it stood up 4 years ago. This was our fourth cumulative one. I don't say annual, but I say cumulative because the movement's building. And so this one was the biggest one we've had yet. It was, I thought, the best program, the highest stature of the program. And I think the Lord's really used me to help this international religious freedom movement kind of build up speed going down the runway and start to take off. We've got so much persecution around the world. It
Mm,
is enormous in so many places, and we're not immune to it. You've got persecution taking place in the West and in the United States that really has modeled and built the whole topic of religious freedom. Is built on it was the foundation of our nation, and yet you got
mm,
this suffocating effort here in the United States to kind of suffocate religion. It's not throwing you in the jail, but it's making it very hard to practice your faith. Or if you want to be in this profession, you can't bring your values to your professional work, and you have to somehow bifurcate who you are professionally from who you are in your soul, and that's suffocating.
mm.
Uh, so I'm glad to see the movement kind of starting to really take off and gather just more altitude. But we need it because there's just so much persecution in various fashions going on everywhere around the world.
Wow. And so that summit would have had, I think it was over 1,000, maybe 1,200 people, and that would have been kind of from all around the world to talk about religious liberty.
1,500.
Wow.
We had 90 different organizations supporting it, from the right to the left, involved in it. Even had humanists that were there that want their religious freedom right to not practice a faith protected. And we're
Mm,
going, good. We want everybody to be able to do with their own soul what they see fit. I may not agree with what you do, but you have the right and the dignity as a person to make that choice. And we need to stand and fight for it because that's really the secret sauce of how you keep a diverse nation like this one
mm.
together is to not force anybody to be different than they see that they want to be. If they want to have this faith or they want to choose this lifestyle, as long as it's not harming somebody else, that you're really trying to give them that dignity to choose uh, whether you agree with the choice or not.
So well, I'm always interested in people's stories and how God kind of places them, how He equips them, and now we can see kind of the full fruition of that experience moving forward. So how did God initially call you into public life?
I was state president of the Future Farmers of America of Kansas, and I met a congressman on our Washington trip. And I'd never met one before. I was from a very small town, Parker, Kansas, 250 people. We lived outside of the town on a farm. My family did. And I met a congressman. I thought, wow, that seems like a really interesting job. I wonder how you get a job like that. And that really was my initial calling, was meeting Congressman Joe Skubitz of the old 5th Congressional District in Kansas. And it started me on a desire, on a journey to get involved. I was later then Kansas Secretary of Agriculture and Congressman, Senator, Governor, and Ambassador, and it's just been just such a delight of my heart to be able to serve in so many ways, and then also really to try to bring my faith into the public square. Because at first I was thinking, you got to really bifurcate these things. You can't really. Politics isn't beanbag. You gotta, maybe you gotta I want to operate my faith on weekends and Sunday, but when I get in the rough and tumble of politics, you're just going to have to fight the way everybody else does. And I started doing that, and I was very dissatisfied with myself and my life. And I thought, no, I got to bring the whole me into it. And as I have, then my joy has flourished. And life has been so much better when you just say, look, this is what I believe. You can vote for me or against me, but this is what I believe. This is why I believe it. This is why I'm passionate about it. And let people decide.
I so appreciate your example in that. I think that can be encouragement, certainly encouragement to me, but also to listeners, whatever kind of sphere of influence they're in business or church leadership, to be who God's created you to be in that sense. Now, I'm sure there are just a number of lessons, but I was interested if you had any kind of key takeaways in your time in Congress, in the House, or in the Senate.
Pursue what's on your heart. I had as I was leaving the Senate, a senior member of the House was also leaving. He'd been a committee chairman, a very distinguished member of the House, and had been in well over 20 years. And he looked at me and he said, I kind of admire what you did, in that you just really followed your heart. And he was saying, I've really worked at some issues, but a lot of it was to kind of keep getting reelected and supported by my district. And now I'm at the end of my career, and I didn't do the things that I should have done or wanted to do.
Wow.
And I kind of look back and going, and I was thinking, I had those same thoughts early on of my staff saying, well, no, wait a minute, we should be involved in this particular financial issue or this issue because our constituents care about it, A. B, we can raise a lot of money off of this. And you need money to get reelected. And if you're going to do all these great things you want to do, we got to get reelected. Doesn't count if we don't get reelected. And I thought that's just a lie. You follow and do what's in your heart. And the people of America want to support a goodness agenda. They want to back people who are fighting from the heart. Whether they fully agree with it or not, they recognize whether you're doing this tactically or out of the wallet or out of your head or out of your heart. I hold up Chris Smith as an example. Often, Chris is the most staunch pro-life member of the Congress, and you'd think, okay, he must be from Oklahoma. He must represent a rural district in Texas. He's from New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
And Chris, how are you keep getting reelected? Well, people see he deals passionately from the heart. He cares about this. He leads strong on it. And they're going, good. The guy believes in something. He's willing to fight for it. I'm willing to support him.
Well, it's such an important lesson. And you're right. I think people have a sense of if you're just doing it for the position, the power, and you're just like everybody else. And especially in a crowded primary, anybody that's going to jump in is probably going to experience something like that. Like, how do you differentiate yourself. That's such great advice of just, following what God's called you to do.
Well, people feel your heart. They
Yeah.
feel. I mean, even Bernie Sanders, they got the bumper sticker for him is "Feel the burn."
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and you're kind of going, the guy is passionate. I disagree vehemently with a lot of his policy positions, but you feel the burn, uh, and
Yeah.
I I think that's we I don't know we think too little of people's abilities to perceive when people
Mhm.
pick up stuff just really pretty fast and pretty quickly.
Wow. That's such good advice. What a lesson there. So then, kind of as governor, and maybe that same lesson kind of carried over, but I'm just amazed to you've been in all of these different roles. So anything that you learned, have a big takeaway from your time as governor?
You got to just ultimately do what you think's right. We had a lot of difficulties in Kansas. We had no money. We had less than $1,000 in the state checking account when I became governor. We had a
Oh,
pension
my goodness.
system that was, it was terrible. We had a pension system that was in the bankruptcy zone, and I had to make a lot of tough choices. Now we got it back. We ended with $600 million plus bank account, state bank account when I left. We ended with a pension system, middle rankings. Um, but you make a lot of difficult choices, and so my approval ratings were way low at the end of it. I signed 19 pro-life bills, and a lot of I look back on it, and you're kind of going, if I hadn't done quite all those things, we wouldn't be in a better position, but I would have had I would have had more popularity with the people. And you're going, bad trade. Don't
Hmm.
trade it for the popularity. Do what you believe is right, and stand with the consequences of it. And I look back and I think that's just the right call. It's not. There's this story from the Inferno, Dante's Inferno, and at one of the lower levels of hell, Dante sees a couple of local politicians that he recognizes.
Hmm.
And he asks his guide, "What are these guys doing here?" And the guide says, "Well, these were people who were given political authority and power and were indolent in using it. They didn't use it for good."
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, wow. I mean, God lifts one up and puts another down, right? That's what
Hmm.
we say. That's what we believe. God's sovereign. If he puts you in a position that you're in, head of a company, the head of a department, a newspaper writer, somebody that does a podcast, and you don't do what you believe and know to be right because you're scared about somebody judging you or
Hmm.
anxious about this or that, um, you're being indolent in a
Hmm.
position God's put you in authority to be in.
Hmm.
And I always thought, I'm scared about doing something and getting a bad article in the Topeka Capital Journal. And then in my judgment, I stand in front of God and he says, "Why didn't you do what you thought was right?" And I was going to say, "Well, because I was afraid I'd get a bad article in the Topeka Capital Journal." I don't think God's going to buy that one really well. I don't think it's going to sound
No, no.
particularly effective. And I
Hmm.
think even saying it, I'm sitting here going, that was a really stupid answer. But it was actually the truth.
Hmm.
That's where I think we let others and how people may react to it or not kind of trim our sails, and we don't do what we really think we should. And there's an ultimate price you have for that.
Hmm. It's a fascinating example. And just yesterday, we were talking about John 10 with a governing official. And in John 10, Jesus talks about being the good shepherd. But in the passage, he sets out that there's kind of three types of leaders: the thief, the hireling, who just kind of shows up and does what everyone tells him just to get the paycheck, and then the good shepherd that knows his people and they know him, but he does lead. And I think that's what the American people are looking for, somebody that's principled, um, listens to the constituents, but then has a vision for leadership. And I'm afraid that so many people, you're right, they're just, well, am I going to get the votes? Am I going to lose the popularity contest? So that's such a great encouragement to just fear God first. So great lessons
and
there from
not
your time in public.
fear God, not man. I mean,
Hmm.
he tells us to. I find for a lot of people of faith, we know the words, we just don't really trust them. We know we're supposed to go forward like little children into the kingdom of God. We know we're to trust God with all our heart, mind, soul, and flesh. We know he says all things will work together for good for those who love the Lord and called according to his purposes. We know those words. We just don't live like we believe them.
It's
It's
true.
like, well, it's okay. I know. Yeah, I hear that. But it just seems too good to be true.
Hmm.
But it is.
Well, that's certainly an encouragement. So now on to your work on international religious freedom. And I was so fascinated by a number of your stories, but what are your thoughts on kind of the state of religious freedom around the world, and maybe focusing in on perhaps China, what's going on there? I know you've also had a lot of conversations in the Middle East and kind of former Soviet republics. So whatever you think would be helpful to us.
Well, I think there's an absolutely huge battle going on in this space. I think the dictators and communist groups of the world have a bead drawn on people of faith, uh, and they're after them. I, I I've stated this in a speech in China, in Hong Kong, when I could still go there. I'm banned there now. That China is at war with faith. It's a war they will not win, but they are at war with faith. And now it's spreading out to their satellite countries. Nicaragua, oh gosh, just a month ago, arrested 11 Nicaraguan pastors that were part of they were doing some evangelical rallies, got them all locked up. They've
Hmm.
closed down a Catholic university. They've arrested priests and pastors. And this has all happened in the last 2 years when Nicaragua went from recognizing Taiwan officially to recognizing China.
Hmm.
So they dropped their recognition of Taiwan, recognized China. I'm sure they got a boatload of money from the Chinese Communist Party for doing this. And I'm
Hmm.
also sure that the Chinese communists told the Ortega regime the only thing that can challenge you effectively in the country are people of faith. It's the
Hmm.
Protestants and the Catholics, and you've got to get your boot on their throat. And here's how you do it.
Hmm.
And it's happening. And that's the kind of war for faith, for the freedom of religion that we're in the world today. There's some bright spots happening. Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan are improving. I mean, they're tentative pieces of it, and there's certainly problems. They're still there. Um, uh, India is getting worse, far worse. Nigeria is probably one of the most dangerous places on the planet to be a Christian now, in some of the rural, particularly central and northern parts of Nigeria. But we've just got to engage and stand up for this fundamental, universally recognized human right and fight for it, or this persecution and oppression is going to grow, and it's only going to get worse with the technology that's now getting into
Hmm.
place to oppress people. The technology is the new game changer that I'm deeply concerned about.
Well, could you dig into that a little bit more? Because this strikes me that, a Caesar or, some Roman emperor that wanted to oppress the church could have only have dreamed about the social credit
Yeah.
system, about being able to track, geofencing of phones. Most recent thing I was studying about was that some of the camera technology can even track human emotion. And then if you're not happy, you're not, promoting the premier, the president. This can all come back. So, are there some specific instances? I believe there may have been one particular province in China that was especially bad on this front.
Xinjiang, far western China, um, in my mind, is the beta test for how you use the new technology to oppress a religious group. It's primarily Muslim. China's 95% Han Chinese, and then they've got a few pockets of Islam, and this is one of the pockets of Islam. And Christian, there's growing Christian population in China and other faiths too, Tibetan Buddhist and Falun Gong. But what they've done is they put in a Communist Party head in Xinjiang, gave him all the resources he wanted, and said, "You suppress this population." He put cameras everywhere. He took genetic sampling of everybody. He tracks everybody's cell phone. That's kind of your passport for modern life anymore. Is this thing? Everybody carries it with you all the time. And they've created a virtual police state. They have facial recognition systems. They have gait recognition to recognize your walk. They can track you everywhere. And then they've also they've got a new gulag of 1 million Muslims in re-education camps to train them to be good Chinese citizens. To me, this is the beta test that you're going to see now. Pieces or large pieces of this go into a number of totalitarian regime places or problem spots. Because I had a guy tell me about $1 million for every 5 million people you can put in this virtual police state system. And that's pretty cheap oppression techniques if you can do it for that price tag.
That's truly frightening. And did you hear any stories of how the Chinese state is working against the church? Some stories that I'm hearing, for example, would be that instead of at times putting a pastor in jail, they'll just go to the people around the pastor and ding their social credit. So therefore, you can't get into law school, you can't get this job. So have you heard anything else about how they're impacting the Chinese church?
And that is an issue that I've heard, is that you've got you're watching the pastor because he's the leader of the church. Anybody that's on his cell phone or that is in his contact then gets their social credit score lowered. So then everybody around him starts scattering because I want to be able to go to this school. I want to be able to get into this job. I want to be able to move into this place. I want to be able to have a passport to move around the country freely. And all those get impacted if you get downgraded as being a loyal citizen or not. I mean, these are systems that Mao would have dreamed of having available to him and didn't. He had to do it all through people, watching other people, and that's pretty hard to do, or hard to hire enough people that are reliable to turn all this data into you. Now you can just collect it, by mass data systems. You can keyword search in any conversation or text message for Jesus or church or whatever, and then sift down and start to find who is using that kind of term, and then just go after them. And it's all going to be sold as a real convenience thing. Like there's a bus in China now, I was reading about, where you get on the bus and it sees you and you don't have to pay, you don't have to get a credit card or money out. It just sees you, recognizes you, hits your account, and you've paid. And they're trying to go to all digital currency in China. So then the state controls all the money and can turn it off or on. And that's the one, when they get to that point, I'm looking at going, holy cow, then what malicious thing could you do, all in the name of some good stability? But it really makes it hard to throw the the brute off your back when it's got that much control over your daily lives and the people around you.
It's really concerning, and not to scare listeners. I mean, some of the things that I've just been learning, if you think about it, and if some of those technologies could be applied here, I mean, this is a sort of oppression that the world has never known. Everything being tracked. So definitely trusting the Lord there, but something we need to be aware of. So with that in mind, how can the United States promote religious liberty around the world? What are some ways that we can be praying about, thinking about, maybe get involved in?
I think one of the key things the United States can do is to raise this human right up to a top tier human right. For a long time, it kind of was a boutique human right. We were interested in freedom of speech, freedom to vote, freedom of assembly, all of which are very important. But this one was kind of, well, that's for religious people. It turns out religion is often the only entity left in a government, in a country, that can stand up to a government, that has enough organization, enough adherence, and enough passion to stand up and say, no, the government's wrong, and I will not go along with this. So if you really want to protect democracy, human rights, the rights of the people, you need to be able to get your foundational piece, and that is your people of faith, to be able to practice their faith freely. Religious freedom for everybody, everywhere, all the time, as we put it. And I think if we would raise the stature of this human right, it benefits all of them, and it benefits the human rights agenda. And then on top of that, 80% of the world's community claims some type of faith. I mean, just most people in the world, less so in the West than most other places, but claim a faith. You're tying into a right that 80% of the world deems important. You've got a mass of people that want this right protected. And I think we haven't valued its strategic value nearly enough. And then just on top of that, if we ever want to stop genocides, most genocides are of a religious minority. The Holocaust, of course, was the Jews. The Uyghur genocide going on now is Muslims. You had the Christians and Yazidis in northern Iraq. You had the Armenian genocide, was Christians being persecuted by Muslims. Rohingyas are Muslims being persecuted by Buddhists. If you're ever going to stop genocide, you've got to deal with protection of your religious minorities.
It's so true. And I remember Tim Keller talking about the future in contrast to the secular myth. The future is much more religious than it is secular, just because of birth rates, and you look at what's going on around the world. And this, I have been reflecting some in last couple of years about, why God's sovereign, and for some reason he's given the United States great power and influence in the world. Now, maybe the Pax Americana is ending, the world order is changing and cracking, but we still have that influence in the world. And the question that I was mulling over is why? Uh, if we have it, there's some reason for it. And if, as we look towards the future, the United States could lean into the promotion of religious freedom, I think that is something that is critical to the Christian gospel moving forward, and something that is certainly noble. So I appreciate that you're mentioning all these things that are happening in the world and how the U.S. can jump in. So there's so much more that we could talk about there, but I did want to pivot back to the United States. And you mentioned as we got started a few concerns that you have here. What are some of the key religious liberty concerns you're seeing in the U.S.?
The people that control so much of the technology in the United States is not the government. It's the private sector. It's Google, Facebook. It's the big corporations. It's the big banks, J.P. Morgan Chase. It's Bank of America. And I think we've got to push on these big, particularly technology companies, not to sideline or try to suffocate people of faith, not to persecute people because they have a traditional values viewpoint of the world. you get groups that get debanked. And too often it's somebody that's got a church affiliation or is a social conservative group. And you're going, why? Well, nobody answers, and there's no accountability, and there's no
Hmm.
openness to it. But it happens, or they get deplatformed, they get thrown out of a platform. And I think the big concern I have here, one of the big concerns I have here, is backing up to that earlier theme, is just this effort to suffocate people of faith and traditional values just under a white tarp, and just not let them have air or light in the
Hmm.
broader culture, in the public square, in the marketplace, just saying, we just don't really like people that have your kind of values. Um, and the country was founded on religious liberty. It was people coming here in the first place to be free, to practice their own faith peacefully, but to practice the faith that they saw fit. And you start to suffocate that, you literally suffocate what America is built on. And that's a big one that I have concern about. And we're seeing that sort of suffocating too taking place in the educational system. We're seeing it in government. We see it in the military. We see it in healthcare. Just this effort to, people of traditional type of values. Um, we don't want you here, and
Hmm.
we don't want to allow you any space to operate in the public sphere. Where America, you're entitled to free exercise of your faith, and that's in public or in private.
That's deeply concerning. And I think it's happening enough that even maybe 5 years ago, people of faith could have said, well, that's just one instance. But now I'm hearing all the time of organizations that are just promoting biblical principles, getting debanked, getting thrown off of CRM platforms. And, so this is happening to many of us. So we can't just kind of put our head in the sand anymore. And so you mentioned most recently this conference that you had on religious liberty, but what are your most recent efforts? How are you can personally through organizations working on religious freedom here and around the world?
We did this one at Heritage, and I chair a National Council for Religious Freedom. We have a monthly Zoom call where we have people connect in that are working this topic. Glad to have any groups that you guys know about or that listen to this be a part of it. Um, they can go get a hold of me at my they can get a hold of me through the Brownback group, or they can go through the ncrf.org, the ncrf.org, and contact us. That's really to try to build up the communication amongst people here in the United States working on religious freedom. Internationally, I've been working a lot lately, particularly with the Armenians. That's a Christian population that they had 120,000 Christians kicked out of their ancient homeland by Azerbaijan and Turkey, Muslim
Mm.
populations. And then Azerbaijan and Turkey are threatening Armenia proper. Now with Biden administration hasn't shown much strength in foreign policy, and so other countries are taking advantage of that right now, and we're just really working to try to support Armenia that they not get attacked and overrun by Azerbaijan and Turkey, even right now. And then also in India, a lot more in Nigeria. India has just gotten so much worse. They had over 400 churches burned last year in
Mm.
India. Uh, it used to be really a country that was very understanding of various religions because it got a number of different religions in the country. But boy, lately the Hindu nationalism has grabbed a hold, and they are just if you're not with that, particularly Christians and Muslims, but not exclusively, also other groups, they're just communal violence has really grown a lot. It's a very
Mm.
sad and troubling situation.
Just one anecdote. Recently, spoke to a church leader there that's trying to evangelize, and fears for his life when he goes to do that. Yeah, so the world has always been difficult, a dark place, and perhaps because of the Pax Americana, we didn't hear and see all of these things all the time, but it's certainly here in the world today. So appreciate all of your great work. Want to enter kind of a speed round here. If you just have a minute, I'd love to hear a little bit about how, even though you have traveled internationally, held all of these important roles, you're happily married and you have a great family. So, do you have any thoughts, maybe just one or two tips for those that are entering public life or in public life, of how to do everything God's called you to in public life, yet still maintain what God's called you to in your family?
I made a mistake at the outset. I thought I had to really sacrifice my values and my family to serve in public life. And I was so ambitious that I was just willing to kind of, well, I'll let those take a side role. And I had a friend of mine in the Senate say to me, he said, I don't think God calls you one place to have you fail in another. I
Hmm.
don't think he calls you to the public square to have you fail in your family. And I started, my faith, God's first, but my family's second, and public life is below that. And so I started protecting family time. I started protecting my Sundays. And God took care of me. I mean,
Hmm.
he will. We say these things, and well, we just don't really quite trust them. But you got to trust it, and you got to believe it. Because I could have easily ended up divorced and separated from my family, and I had 7 guys I was in different Bible studies with while I was in Congress that got divorced or significant family problems.
Hmm.
And I remember just praying to the Lord one time. I said, "Well, why didn't that happen to me?" And he said, "Well, you asked me to help you." And I
Hmm.
did. I just said, "Lord, you
Hmm.
got to change me."
Wow.
And he took me through a cancer episode to do that. That wasn't the way I wanted to go through it, but it was the way he did it. And thank God he did, because here I am. I've been separated from my family and had all sorts of difficulties. I just don't. We make these trades mentally and earthly when God doesn't require us to do that.
Hmm.
If he's going to open doors for you to be able to go through, he'll shut other ones, and he just wants you to do what's right. And remember too,
Hmm.
when we look at things earthly, often the way God does things is 180 degrees the other way.
This is true.
So if we're looking at it
Uh,
over here and saying, if I'm going to be in public life, I've got to be proud, boastful, and I got to tell people how good I am. And God's saying, I hate pride. I want you to be humble. And you're going, how am I going to get in the press if I'm humble? Well, Lord will figure that out for
hmm.
you. Or,
Hmm.
you just, I had a guy tell me that one time, said, often God does things 180 degrees of what man does. And he gets it right and we don't. So I think people ought to. One final quick thought on this is I've started working a lot less on my to-do list and a lot more on my to-be list.
Wow.
That I used to always have okay, I got these 10 things to get done, and I'd mark 2 off in a day. I never got my to-do list done. My to-be list is be loving, be caring, care for my family, care for this person. That one's actually going to last. My to-do list never gets done, and
Hmm.
my to-be list will last for eternity. And so I've started working on much more of my to-be list.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. Everything that you've shared has been such an encouragement. That one especially, I wanted to point that out to listeners because you do in this space have been at it long enough where you see people flame out and burn, and they give up their family or they, fall into an affair. And so I just so appreciate your example and the encouragement there, especially that you work on your to-be list. That's so good. Just a couple other quick questions. One was you made a comment at our dinner that intrigued, fascinated me, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was along the lines of, we bemoan where the United States is. And certainly there's a lot of things going on, but you said that things are just now bad enough that God finds it interesting. Would you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, the thing that's really encouraged me was that God never needs a majority. And most of the time, he doesn't want a majority. He wants a faithful remnant. That's what he's looking for, is a faithful remnant. And, I mean, the Gideon, he starts at what, 30,000, and he gets him down to 300, and he's going to fight an army that's, you can't see the end of the army. And Gideon, you got to think Gideon's going, Lord, how are we going to take on with 300? And we had 30,000 and you ran them all off. And we're going to take these guys on with 300. But that's so that we know it's God that did it, not us. And that's where it's getting for us. It's gone from, so much of a really strong nation values wise and traditional families and based on a Judeo-Christian ethic to a very broad base. And you're looking and going, boy, this doesn't seem to be trending right. And you're going, yeah, it's getting down to about the odds of what God would find it interesting. Is he going to find a faithful remnant? And that's what I said that night to that crowd. You are the faithful remnant. And you may look around and going, I don't know why God has faith in me. What's your heart? It's not who you are, and it's what he can do through you that he'll do. And to me, that's always been the encouraging part, is he's just, remember the one story on Sodom and Gomorrah, he's looking for 10. It's always looking for just 10. Well, they're here. They exist. And we're going to whip everybody else with that little group. I kind of feel sorry for the other side.
It's true. Well, I just thought that was such a great encouragement to the audience there, and certainly wanted the audience here to hear it as well. And so there was one last statement, and I generally ask kind of a billboard question. I can't really think of a better one than this. And the general idea of the statement was live like a fifth grader. So maybe would you kind of dig into that? And if you have any kind of final thoughts or encouragement for the audience as well, if you wouldn't mind sharing it.
Yeah, a friend of mine's been teaching me about this. You enter the kingdom of God as a child. You don't get in as an adult. You work with God. You don't work for him. So you're operating alongside him. He's driving the car. I'm along for the ride to share in this. And the more we look at it that way, then I start going into meetings anymore, not so much studying my notes and preparing in them, but more praying, well, Lord, I pray to glorify God. He says, seek first the kingdom of God. All these things will be added unto you, right? I mean, he says that. So, okay, well, God, I want this meeting to be glorifying to you. Now, I pray to do that. And so I work a lot more now preparing my heart going into meetings than I do preparing my head. And just, saying, okay, Lord, a friend of mine gives this example. He says, if you tell your kid and your child's in the fifth grade and you say, we're going to Disney World. So that may not be a good example anymore, but let's say we're going to Disney World. The kid goes, great. That's a wonderful idea. Runs upstairs, grabs his swimsuit, puts it in his suitcase, comes down, I'm ready. Let's go. The adult thinks, no, wait a minute. I got to buy some airplane tickets. Do we have enough money? I got to get a hotel. What's the kid? Are there any values benefits that I can get cheaper tickets on here? The parents all figuring all this out. And the fifth grader goes, let's go to Disney World.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, how God wants us to look at life. He's given us this beautiful earth to operate in. He sent his son to save our souls. He loves us more than we can imagine. And he wants us to kind of come along with him for the ride. Now, the kid gets in the back seat of the car, and the adult doesn't really care hey, Dad, you kind of cut that guy off here. Would you kind of slow down? Dad, are you driving? Are you watching right there? I got the car driving. God doesn't always need my coaching from the back seat of the car. He wants me to be there with him and to share his love and joy with other people. And I think we make the Christian life too hard. And Jesus tells us, you take it like a child. It is like a child that you enter into this. And I find as I do that more, I'm a lot happier. It's a lot more fun, and a lot more good things happen.
I just thought that was so profound when you said it. And again, it's just you come at it like a child, and but also so convicting because we're always so concerned about what's next, this and that. And so I just thought that was such a great encouragement, especially with the very weighty things that you have dealt
Yeah.
with, that you're dealing with now, to just live like a fifth grader and to allow God to take the lead. Wow, what a great encouragement to us. Well,
Well,
Ambassador,
and
go ahead.
try it. And your listeners, just
Mm,
try it. Someday just say, okay, today I'm going to live like a fifth grader. What's that going to look like?
mm,
Just try it. Try it for the next 2 hours and just see how it goes.
amen. Amen. Well, I so appreciate that encouragement, and we'll look forward to continuing to see where God's putting you, how you're working. Looking forward to continuing the conversation. But thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today, to share how God's used you in the public square and how we can be praying and working towards championing religious freedom in the United States and around the world. So thank you again.
Thank you. God bless you.